The offseason continues here in Charlotte as the Carolina Panthers are immersed in the third phase of OTAs. True OTAs going on down at the practice facility over there off of Main Street in Uptown Charlotte. Let's get some perspective on what's going on at the quarterback situation and some other players there with the Carolina Panthers as Jonathan Alexander of the Charlotte Observer joins me on today's episode of Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday through Friday, your team every day. That's what we do here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Nowhere else can you find a Panthers dedicated podcast, talking Panthers Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. A lot of great podcasts out there do a great job. We do it 5 days a week, at least right now. Might get into off-season mode here very shortly. Then I can no longer say Monday through Friday. But either way, make sure to watch the show and subscribe to the show over on YouTube. If you don't watch on YouTube or subscribe on YouTube, we can go ahead and change that right now by clicking on the subscribe button. But you can also check us out on all the podcasting platforms out there, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, Stitcher, and all the other ones out there. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show so you don't miss a single episode of Locked On Panthers. And be sure to follow me on Twitter at Julian Council, where every single Friday I answer weekly Friday mailbag questions. To participate, either at me at Julian Council, DM me at Julian Council, or leave a comment on today's show, and I'll get to it on tomorrow's show, the weekly Friday mailbag here on Locked On Panthers. On today's show, Jonathan Alexander covers the Panthers for the Charlotte Observer, works with Ellis Williams, works with Scott Fowler, the columnist there at the Observer, and they all do a great job covering the Carolina Panthers. OTAs were going on. He was down there on Tuesday as the media got to check out a portion of the off-season training, or what is it? OTAs, off-season training activities? Organizational, I forgot what it's called. Either way, he was down there checking everything out, and he got to talk to Matt Corral and Christian McCaffrey and Sam Darnold and Dante Foreman and everybody else who was there. Jeremy Chin got to talk to all of them. JC Horn about what was going on and just, how they feel, how the bodies feel, how things are coming along with Ben McAdoo's offense. And he also had an article on Monday talking about how the Panthers could avoid a fifth straight losing season. And there was a little blurb there about Cam Newton that we talked about the other day. And I want to get some clarity on Cam Newton and if there are truly conditions and what they are for Cam Newton to return here to Carolina, and if he could get an opportunity to be a starting quarterback here in 2022, and really what the Panthers' plan is at quarterback in 2022 and beyond. So we'll take a quick pause here in Locked On Panthers, then talk to Jonathan Alexander from the Charlotte Observer. Y'all already know, because I told you, that Built Bar is by far the best tasting protein bar ever, and we have great news to share with you. You've been asking about it, and Built Bar has finally delivered. The Built Granola Bars are here. Built Granola Bars come in 3. That's 3 unbelievable flavors: chocolate peanut butter, chocolate coconut, and white chocolate berry. Want to try all 3? You can get a mixed box at Built.com right now. These are so different from the bars and the puffs. Built granola bars are loaded with granola. It's the perfect combination of crunch and chewiness, but just like bars and puffs, these babies are packed with protein and covered in 100% real chocolate. With 150 calories, 15 grams of protein, and only 4 grams of sugar, Built granola bars will change your world. Built has cracked the code to better granola. They're the perfect healthy snack to pack on your lunch, take on the road, and eat as a snack. So go to Built.com right now and use promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off your first order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, back here on Locked On Panthers. And as promised, Jonathan Alexander, beat reporter for the Charlotte Observer. You can follow him on Twitter at John M. Alexander. That's John with no H, folks. I mean, it's Jonathan. You guys should know how to spell his name. He now joins us here on the show to talk about, of course, the Carolina Panthers. Jonathan, how you doing, man?
I'm pretty good. How's it going, Julian?
It's good. It's good. Cannot complain too much heading into this Memorial Day weekend. And Panthers back on the field, OTAs. You talked to them over on Tuesday there on Main Street. And we'll get into what you saw and what the early thoughts are they're kind of laying the framework and the foundation of the team heading into this 2022 season. But you had an article on Monday talking about how the Panthers could potentially avoid a 5th straight losing season. And one of the key parts of the article, which was only 2 sentences, was you bringing up that the Carolina Panthers are still interested in Cam Newton because they're interested in pretty much every available free agent quarterback out there. And that has since been aggregated by people on Twitter and elsewhere as there was 2 conditions that you had laid there that might not actually be conditions that the Panthers want to bring him back at the right price, which, well, every team would want to do that, and that he would not be promised a starting job. Can you just give us more clarity on the Panthers' interest in Cam Newton and how things potentially could play out if he does come back here to Carolina?
Yeah. So just through talking with people and hearing what we hear publicly, the Panthers, would like to have Cam Newton back. But there are certain things that would prevent them from like going out and just grabbing them. For one, Cam Newton would have to agree to it. And I think for the Panthers, their mindset, they've always said, Scott Fitterer and Matt Rule have always said like it has to make sense for them, right? They said that back in March a couple of times at different press conferences. And through talking with people, what makes sense for them really is, the fact that Cam Newton last year didn't really prove that he was a starter for the Panthers. He could have, taken control of that job. Now, he definitely didn't have an offensive line, and he definitely came in the middle of the season and had to learn the playbook. That's understandable. But I think what we saw from Cam Newton was that he just lacked the arm strength that he once had and what made him so great when he first showed up to the Panthers. I think a lot of people recognize that. A lot of people will probably have doubts of whether he could win that job over Sam Darnold. Now, he possibly could, but a lot of people wonder whether. So I think the thought process is, if Cam Newton came in and he understood that, if we brought him in, he's not guaranteed the starter role. He would have to obviously earn that. And they know that they don't want to pay another quarterback more than $5 million. Even Baker Mayfield or Jimmy Garoppolo, they're hoping, as they go for other quarterbacks, they're hoping the team that they, trade with or try to get pays the majority of that contract. So I think those are the circumstances around it. They love to have Cam back because they value his leadership, and he instantly became a leader on that team when he came back, and that's his personality. They want that. Ideally, they would love that from Sam Darnold. But they recognize that value in Cam Newton, but they also recognize that he has his limitations, and they would sign him if that understanding was there, and he would sign with them if he probably could have some guarantees as well.
Yeah, and you talk about it making sense for the Panthers. I mean, does it make sense for them to bring back Cam after what you've laid out? Because I understand that Cam is the best quarterback this franchise has ever had. He's the only franchise quarterback that they've ever had. And you look at the Arizona game and really Washington, if he could have played like that the rest of the season, then I think he'd probably be in a position to be the starter now here in Carolina. But because he faded and then they brought back Sam Darnold to be the starter against the Saints and against the Buccaneers, you kind of saw how they valued him in this offense and what their plans are at quarterback, and they've gone out and drafted a guy in Matt Corral. Does it make sense for them to bring back Cam Newton?
To be honest with you, I don't think it makes sense if they're trying to get another quarterback and a quarterback that they hope can be an upgrade. Like if they're trying to get Baker Mayfield or Jimmy Garoppolo, which is my understanding that there's less of a chance that would happen. But if they're trying to get Baker Mayfield, I don't think it makes sense to go after Cam because you would have all those quarterbacks in your room. However, if you know that Sam Darnold, if you know that you're not going to get one of those guys, then maybe getting Cam Newton is good if you get him for a less price. And that's the understanding that PJ Walker probably isn't going to make this team. Then, under that condition. But if you want to upgrade and you think you can compete for a playoff spot, you want to take the guy who most recently has shown that he can pass for 20-some touchdowns. Or I think he passed for 17 last year. But the one who's had the most recent success.
No, that makes sense. And there's two things you said there that actually jumped out at me. So with Baker, and we'll talk about him, but you're saying that Jimmy Garoppolo does not seem like something that's going to happen. It's less likely for the Panthers that they do make a trade with San Francisco for him.
Yeah, I think based on my understanding, San Francisco has been playing hardball like the Panthers have been playing. Like the Browns have shown a willingness to take on some of Baker Mayfield's contracts. My understanding that they said, okay, we'll take on $9 million of his $18.9 million. And the Panthers were like, no, you got to take on more than that. As for the 49ers, they've been saying, no, how about you just renegotiate with him? And they think that they can get good value for Jimmy Garoppolo. So that's making that a little bit tougher. And the Panthers will say, okay, we'll either wait for Baker, or this makes more sense for us to pursue him because of that.
Yeah, I don't really see how it benefits San Francisco to get rid of Jimmy G with Trey Lance, who he's now getting all the snaps out there because Jimmy G's not healthy, not available to be in OTAs and mandatory minicamp. So they're going to get a good look at him. And if they don't think he's ready, then why not keep the guy who's helped you get to the NFC title game the last 3 years? And of course, one of those years going to the Super Bowl. Now, the other thing that you said that jumped out at me was PJ Walker. He's saying that he's not likely to make this team because we've talked about possibility of bringing in Baker, bringing in Jimmy G, possibly bringing back Cam. Obviously, Sam's on this roster. If they played a game tomorrow, which they don't, he would be the starting quarterback. Matt Corral, his development. There has not been really any talk at all about PJ Walker. Does it look like that he's probably on his way out, especially depending on how Corral develops over the course of the next couple months?
Yeah, if they get a fourth quarterback, then I think PJ Walker will obviously be the odd man out. One, because they have more faith in Sam Darnold than PJ Walker as a starter. Matt Corral is a guy who you invested a lot in. Next year's pick in this year's third-round pick. So he would be on the roster. And if you try to add a veteran quarterback who you think is an upgrade, then that guy would be a starter. And Panthers aren't going to keep 4 quarterbacks on the roster. So yeah. I think they would obviously try to sneak PJ Walker on the practice squad if they could. I think PJ Walker has shown that he can be a quality's third or second string quarterback somewhere. So, yeah, I think he would be the odd man out.
Okay. And if they stay at 3, is he on this roster or could he still be the odd man out?
To me, I think it would make sense for them to keep 3 if Sam Darnold, Matt Corral, and PJ Walker were there. Just because I don't know what we're going to see from Matt Corral. I think that there's a good chance Sam Darnold could struggle. And I just say that based on past
what we've
years.
seen.
Yeah, what we've seen, right? That's the only thing I'm basing it out of, right? I've learned this year to trust your eyes.
Yeah.
But so, I think it would be smart of them to keep 3 quarterbacks in that situation.
Yeah, I agree. So if they add a veteran, looks like PJ Walker likely on the outs there. Bring up Baker. I talked to Joe Person, your colleague over there at The Athletic last week, and he actually was giving me a lesser number what Cleveland was willing to pay for Baker, saying about $3 million, and which is wild to me that a 3 out of $18 million that they'd be willing to spend. That doesn't make any sense. Doesn't seem like a team that has leverage. Now, from what you're telling me and what you've heard, it was more like 9, which makes it even. I have a hard time understanding why Cleveland didn't make that deal happen. If that's the case, like there's been reporting, you've had it, Ellis has had it, everyone's had it, that the Panthers are still interested in veterans. Like, does it seem like he's the most likely option to happen? And if he's going to happen, when's it going to happen? Because I'm sitting here right now, like, okay, you have installs, you have true OTAs going on right now, you have mandatory minicamp next month in June. Wouldn't this be the perfect time to bring in a veteran opposed to waiting until July and right before training camp to then have them learn the offense? Because how is Baker going to really come in here and compete for the job when he's also trying to learn the offense at the same time? If he, of course, comes here.
Yeah. And let me make sure I clarify. I want to make sure I explain it correctly. Yeah. So the Browns were willing to take on $9 million and hope that the Panthers would pay a little bit more than $9 million. But the Panthers are not interested in that. They probably won't pay more than $4 or $5 million, and ideally lower than that. So the Browns during the trade negotiation said, we'll take on $9 million. You pay the other $9 million. Panthers like, no, Panthers are playing hardball on this because they know that they can, and the Browns are desperate. So, but I think ideally the Panthers would like somebody to come in earlier, sooner rather than later. But they have their number that they said that they don't want to spend more of, and they know that these negotiations may take some time. As the Browns, hope that they can get a good trade partner and can get something in return. It's seeming like that's not going to happen because the Panthers and other teams are also waiting.
Yeah, I mean, Baker clearly is not a part of their plans. They brought in Jacoby Brissett. They even brought in Joshua Dobbs, who spent time in Pittsburgh, and then Deshaun just took the entire offense to the Bahamas, and Baker was not there. So clearly he's not a part of that team. So I'm curious to see how that works out. And thank you for clarifying that. I have to go back and listen to what Joe had to say because I don't want to be misquoting you or him here on the show as you guys give out great information for me and everyone out there who listens. Now, Sam Darnold, I kind of applaud him for how he's handled the offseason. I know a lot of people rolled their eyes yesterday or on Tuesday when he talked about how he still, believes he can be a good quarterback in this league. And then back when he was on Taylor Lewan's podcast, the left tackle with the Titans, talk about how he's proven that he's a good quarterback, which outside of, I guess, the first 3 games last year, I don't really see how that could be possible. But sure, confidence is key. You don't get to this spot as a professional athlete if you don't have confidence in yourself and belief in yourself. And I would hope that he would, opposed to being like, yeah, I'm terrible, so I have no chance of ever doing anything good here. But this is an important time for him, especially if he can show the team that, hey, through the install period and working with Ben McAdoo the next month, that you guys don't need to go out there and get somebody else to come and compete with me, that I can be the guy. Like, do you agree? And does it seem like the Panthers would be willing, if they see enough out of Darnold the next couple of weeks, to just say, all right, we believed him last year, we gave up those assets. Let's see what Sam can now do behind a better offensive line. And then hopefully Robbie bouncing back, and then a number 3 wide receiver emerging. And of course, Christian McCaffrey staying healthy.
Yeah. I think ideally that's what they would love. They would love for their investment to pay off, and perhaps maybe with some protection finally, that he can be better. But I think they know that he's not the long-term future. They've determined that he's not the long-term future for him. But if they can get him to play well for one more year and buy time for Matt Corral, who they think can be really good, then that would be a home run for them at this point. But so far Sam Darnold hasn't shown that. And they need for him, and maybe Ben McAdoo can untap that.
Does it seem like the plan for them is to have Corral kind of redshirt this year and then go into 2023 as competing for the job, but really the guy that they want to be the QB1?
Yeah, I think that's what they want. I don't think it's set in stone because things happen. If Sam Darnold struggles, I think they'd have no problem with playing Matt Corral if he looked ready. So I think that's what they hope they can do.
And that's the curious thing, because you talk about, and I agree with you, and I think everyone out there who's watched Sam Darnold last year and previous years in New York would agree that he's, unless he goes out this season, stays healthy the first time in his career, and just lights up the league and becomes comeback player of the year, I don't see how he's going to be the long-term option here in Carolina or really elsewhere. So if that's the case, and then they like Corral, if they bring in someone like Baker, would that person have an opportunity to be the long-term, or are they just looking for someone just to hold it down for this season, let Corral develop, and then hand the keys to Corral? Because I look at Baker, he's a former number 1 pick. Matt Corral, 3rd rounder. And you look at the league, it's Russell Wilson's the only 3rd round pick who's a starting quarterback right now. Now there's guys like Dak and Kirk Cousins who've had good careers so far that were 4th round picks or later, and of course Tom Brady, but we're not going to compare Tom Brady to anybody in the draft class who gets drafted in the 3rd round later. But like, would they give those guys an opportunity to maybe prove themselves, or would it just be like, hey, you're here this year, basically just maybe save Rule's job, then Matt, your turn in 2023?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that they would allow that to happen. Like, say, Baker Mayfield lit it up and show if Baker Mayfield took a huge step, which I think Baker Mayfield definitely needs to do. I think this is an important year for his career too.
Yeah.
I think people have started to lose faith, the perception of Baker Mayfield and playing with him, and that he might not be a good teammate. I think that lingers out there. But I think that possibly if he could, elevate his game and show that he does have potential, I think he could win the job. But I think going into it, the thought is he would be a bridge guy. 1 year left on his contract. Hold down the fort until we find that next solution, whether that is Matt Corral, or if you find out throughout the season that Matt Corral isn't the option, then you take another shot at another guy. But I'm sure he'll have that opportunity to prove himself. And if it isn't for Carolina, it'll be for another team. But I think this year will definitely determine that.
It's interesting to me, just like having this conversation with you about, it doesn't really seem like they have much of a plan for this season. It's like, what we have is what we have. We want to take the slow route with Matt Corral and then see what he can do from 2023. And then, really, 2023 and 2024, the way that they evaluate quarterbacks nowadays, you got like 2 seasons to prove it, or else you're out and they'll go draft somebody else. But this year doesn't seem like they have any great options or a plan. Like, why would anyone have any different expectations for this upcoming season at quarterback than they would have after seeing what we saw last season, considering that they probably don't want Corral to play and that Darnold's going to be the starter, and then they might bring in someone in Baker Mayfield who has gone from QB1 to QB4 in a matter of like 2 months.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. I think that the play has to be a lot better. I mean, I think, that's a big question that fans have. So far, it hasn't been good in the 3 years. I don't know if I've been on record to say, I've written this in my stories, but I always thought it was a mistake, for the Panthers to let go of Teddy Bridgewater so early. I thought he was here for 3 years, and that was really the only expectation for me until they found that potential franchise quarterback. And I thought they could have drafted, Justin Fields there. I know Justin Fields looked bad, and, people in the Panthers organization would tell you that, but he had a bad offensive line too, and it was only year one. So,
and his coach got fired. Yeah, the situation in Chicago is not perfect.
Yeah, his coach got fired. So, I thought they missed that opportunity there. They spent a lot of money in giving Teddy Bridgewater away. But they have to get it figured out. And I think at this point, they feel like the pieces around everybody is getting better. And I think right now they're just trying to, figure out what they can do with quarterback. And right now there's no guaranteed answer. They hope Matt Corral's the answer a couple years from now, next year maybe. But there really isn't a guaranteed answer there.
It feels like the plan originally was, hey, Teddy, like it was basically a 2-year deal that they gave him. They could have kept him for that third year if they wanted to. They could have obviously had him start in 2020. Then in 2021, he could have been there to have someone like Fields or Mac Jones that were sitting there at 8, be the backup, learn from him, and then start this upcoming season. But I guess something got in the way. I think someone, and the guy up top is probably who got in the way. Certainly,
absolutely.
He had a lot to say when Marty Herney, they mutually parted ways. I'll put that in quotes with Marty Herney as a general manager. And there were some words that were said about being in constant pursuit of that franchise quarterback. And from that point on, you kind of knew that Teddy Bridgewater would not be back. And since then, not a lot of great decisions have been made. At least they have gone the route of drafting a quarterback. We can still question, did they need to trade into the third round and get Matt Corral, who might have been sitting right there at 137? If not him, we know Sam Howell was there, who was someone that people talk about. Maybe he's 6th in the first round, maybe he's a 2nd round pick. The same kind of talk that we had about Desmond Ridder and even Malik Willis or Kenny Pickett. I guess Kenny Pickett always seemed like a 1st round pick, but that was kind of the same conversation we had about a guy like Sam Howell, who's sitting right there. So we'll see how that pans out now.
And they were going to draft Sam Howell too.
Really?
Even after Matt Corral. They considered it. That was they love Sam Howell too. They like Matt Corral better, but they were also going to draft Sam Howell and then have the 2 rookies battle it out if they could get that. But it didn't fall out that way. Which makes you wonder. Like they could have waited and not given up that 3rd round pick, and just got. Hope got one of the 2, but they thought that there was value in getting both and having them battle out. And that was one of their possibilities.
That's an interesting possibility because if they liked Howell, and of course, obviously like Matt Corral more, like he was right there. And who knows, maybe Corral would have been right there. So you have to question for Scott Fitter to talk about going into the draft, how they want to protect their assets as they were going from pick 6 to 137, didn't have a pick in the 2nd or 3rd round until they traded up with New England, who now owns their 3rd and 6th round picks in next year's draft. And looking at the compensatory pick formula, doesn't look like they're going to get a comp pick next year. Right. So they're still kind of putting themselves behind the 8 ball, and who knows what other reactionary move they make that might cost them a 1st or 2nd round pick in 2023, as we saw this past year. They've certainly done that. So maybe they've learned their lesson, but I don't know. But that is interesting that you bring up that information. Now, a couple more things here. I'll let you go, Jonathan. Looking at it, opposite of Brian Burns, it seems like they're going to go by committee as of right now. Frankie Louvu, Marquise Haynes, who they re-signed. Jadeveon Clowney, who's Rock Hill native, went to South Point High. He's now re-signed with the Browns. Was it Melvin Ingram who was out there who just signed with the Dolphins or something like that? Yeah. Are there any veterans out there that they might be targeting at edge rusher? Because they just got rid of Joe Jackson. They have another roster spot available as they got to get to 90 before going out of training camp in a couple months. Is there anyone that you've heard that they might be possibly interested in, or are they just waiting to see maybe what happens with roster cutdowns later on in August?
Yeah, I think they'll probably wait this out, especially because I think If they did sign somebody that would cost a little bit of money, that it would be a quarterback. So I think I think it would be a slow approach to that. I think they are okay. They would like to add to the opposite of Brian Burns, but they are okay if they don't get one because they have a belief in Frankie Louvu. They think giving Marquise Haynes more opportunities will help, and Etor Gross Matos can play inside and outside as well. So I think they'll add if there's an opportunity there for the right price, but I think that they're also going to be patient with that.
Do you get any feeling on how this organization values and feels about Robbie Anderson right now? And he's not at OTAs or voluntary. That's important to mention. Matt Rule did say that he appreciates that they are voluntary, which I find hard to believe that a coach actually really truly believes that. Because even any sports, even in high school, we have voluntary things. Nothing's ever truly voluntary. Like you really need to be there. But he wasn't there last year, which is fine. He'll probably be there mandatory minicamp, but it didn't have a great year last season. And you look at kind of the sideline emotion. I'm not going to count an outburst or a tirade. Like these guys care. This is their jobs. Like you would want to see the emotion. What happened with the Eagles game, and just also him yelling at Sam Darnold. It's clear that maybe he's not in love with the idea. But then you see on social media as well talking about how no thanks to Baker Mayfield, who could end up being his teammate. Like, do you have any insight on like kind of how they feel about him right now? As like Terrace Marshall has an opportunity maybe here to kind of move towards that number 2 spot, as this could be Robbie's last season, depending on, of course, how he plays.
I mean, they drafted Terrace Marshall because they hoped that he could develop into that guy opposite of DJ Moore. And they hope that this will be a good year for him. He was hurt last year. So they blame the slow progression on that. Because they had to build him up. He didn't really, in OTAs, wasn't really participating because of his foot injury.
Yeah.
I think with Robbie Anderson, I get a sense that there probably is some frustration there. From his season last year, he had went from 95 catches, more than 1,000 yards, and then he gets paid, and then he has the season that he had. I'm sure that there's some frustration there, but I mean, I think that they believe in what he's possibly capable of doing, like that 2020 season.
Yeah.
So they just restructured his contract, so it makes it a lot more difficult to part ways with him. So I think there's a mixed bag there. Definitely some frustration there with how last year went.
Okay. Last one here for you. Christian McCaffrey. Got to talk to him. Of course, the media corps there, you guys asked him a lot about his injuries and how he's going to manage his body. And I remember last year, you could just tell how he was just so over getting asked about that. It's unfortunate because the last time we saw him healthy for a full season, he did something that only happened 3 times in the history of the NFL, the 1,000-yard rushing and receiving season. Coincidentally, it's interesting that he talked to Marshall Faulk, the other guy who's done that alongside Roger Craig, who was the 49ers running back when they were winning the Super Bowls back in the 80s and 90s. And that about talking, trying to get his body together. It pretty seems it's going to be clear that he's not going to touch the field at all come preseason and maybe even be limited past then, you would think. Yeah.
Matt Rule had mentioned that they wouldn't use him in the 3 preseason games. I think, the reason why they signed Foreman was, to give them a changeup. He's a big power back. They hope to use him in those goal line situations and possibly use Christian McCaffrey elsewhere. I think they got Dante Foreman to spell Christian McCaffrey a lot more. And I think that'd be good for him long term. We see these running backs have these short shelf life. Henry got hurt, Dalvin Cook got hurt, Christian McCaffrey got hurt. It's inevitable for running backs, really. So I do think you'll see a little bit of a dial back, and definitely in the preseason won't play. I don't know he played last year either, but I think you're going to see a little bit more spread out. I don't think you're going to see an over reliance on Christian McCaffrey.
Okay, which would be good. And I told people too, like after the first couple of weeks, we're talking about his touches. Like, hey, well, maybe tell the quarterback to stop checking it down to him 8-9 times a game, because that doesn't help. If Darnold's like, well, the first read's not there, go and dump down here to Christian, which hell, it works out. It's a good thing, but it's not great for his longevity and him playing a full season, which he has not been able to do since back in 2019. So hopefully we'll see how that works out with him moving forward. But appreciate your time, man. Appreciate your insight. Obviously, the quarterback talk and conversation, it's not going to stop until they find one. And hopefully Maybe it's Darnold, maybe it's Corral, Baker. I don't know. Hopefully they can find one soon so we can talk about the other things with this football team and more importantly, avoiding that fifth straight losing season and actually having a winning football team. As I mean, I'm tired of talking about this team being bad and people complaining and bitching and moaning on social media, and I'm sure it's even worse for you.
Yeah, definitely. Panther fan, they want to win the season. I don't blame them for wanting it. So.
Nah, man, not at all. But enjoy your holiday weekend, man. Appreciate your time as always. Again, follow him on Twitter at John M. Alexander and subscribe to The Observer. It's your local paper. Go out there and do that. If you want good Panthers information, he's got it. Ellis Williams has got it. Scott Bauer, the columnist over there, been here for a long time. All three of them do a fantastic job covering the Carolina Panthers. And it's a 24/7 job, 365. The NFL never stops. So make sure to follow Jonathan and check out all his work over at the Charlotte Observer. Take another quick pause here on Locked On Panthers and wrap the show after this. Great stuff there from Jonathan Alexander. He works for the Charlotte Observer covering your Carolina Panthers, and interesting little nuggets on the Browns contract situation and what they wanted to pay for Baker Mayfield, what the Panthers are willing to pay for a quarterback. Looks like about $5 million or less if they're bringing Baker Mayfield. Will the Browns find a way to make that work out, or the Panthers find a way to make it work out? We'll find out later on. And the little tidbit there about Sam Howell could have still been drafted, and the Panthers would have had him and Matt Corral duke it out at quarterback. Wild stuff there. So I don't know what's going on, but they need to figure this quarterback situation out because we spend entirely too much time talking about it. But quarterbacks are very important as it is a quarterback-driven league. And if you don't have one, you have really no shot at winning in a National Football League. So there that is. Make sure to subscribe to the Charlotte Observer. Check out his work, and Ellis Williams' work, and Scott Bauer's work, and all of the great people that work over at our local paper here in Charlotte, the Charlotte Observer. That's going to wrap it up here for this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Make sure, again, to watch the show and subscribe to the show over here on YouTube. If you don't watch, that's okay. You can check us out on all the podcasting platforms out there by reviewing, and subscribing to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the other podcasting platforms out there. And be sure to follow me on Twitter at Julian Council, where every single Friday, like tomorrow, I answer your weekly Friday mailbag questions. To participate, either at me at Julian Council, DM me at Julian Council, or leave a comment on today's show. Just make sure to put Friday mailbag and your real name, and I'll get to your questions on tomorrow's show. So in the meantime, stay safe, keep pounding, and as always, I will, well, not always, but I'll talk to you tomorrow on Friday.